The forgotten Faseed morning sun was rising over Mountain View, but Sundar Pichai barely noticed the streaks of light painting the horizon. His driver pulled the car into a quiet street, away from the familiar rush of Silicon Valley offices and glass towers. Sundar had insisted on no meetings for the first half of the day. He had told his assistants only that he needed some time alone. But in truth, he was chasing a feeling he couldn't shake, something that had been whispering to him for weeks. He had stumbled on an old photograph while going through his late mother's belongings. It was faded, edges curling, but the image was clear enough. In the picture, a young Sundar was sitting on the lap of a woman in a simple cotton sari, her smile soft, her eyes kind yet tired. She was not his grandmother, not a relative. She was the woman who had taken care of him when his parents worked long hours in Chennai. His nanny, her name was Kamala. Sundar hadn't thought about her in years, and the sudden memory had pulled at him in a way he couldn't ignore. He had asked around quietly. Relatives in India, an old neighbor, even his childhood friend who remembered playing in the courtyard with him. All of them had given the same answer. They had lost touch with her. Most assumed she had passed away. After all, she had been much older even then. But one name had surfaced, a thread to pull. Someone claimed they saw an old woman working in a small shop near the outskirts of the city. Someone who looked very much like Kamala. So here he was, stepping out of the car on a quiet street, lined with modest shops. Sundar wore no suit, no bodyguards, just a plain shirt and trousers. He wanted to blend in, to find her as himself, not as the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. His heart beat faster with each step. Was it possible? Could she still be alive? Still working at 85? The shop was small, almost hidden between two larger ones. The signboard was chipped, its letters nearly invisible. Inside, shelves, leaned with the weight of dusty items, small groceries, packets of spices, plastic containers. The smell of old wood and turmeric hung in the air, and behind the counter, bending to arrange a stack of jars, was a frail figure in a faded sari. Sundar froze. The years had bent her back. Her hair was white. Her hands trembled slightly as she moved, but there was no mistaking those eyes. Eyes that once watched over him as he cried from a scraped knee. Eyes that sang him to sleep when thunderstorms shook the windows. Sundar's throat tightened. It was her. Kamala. She hadn't seen him yet. She was too focused on her task, humming softly to herself, the same tune she used to sing when he was a boy. Sundar stepped closer, each movement heavier than the last. He wanted to call her name, to embrace her, to thank her for the love she had given him when he was too young to understand. But as he opened his mouth, he noticed something that cut him deeper than he expected. Kamala, single quotes. His hand shook, not just from age, but from exhaustion. Her breathing was shallow, as if each movement cost her strength she no longer had. Customers came and went, speaking curtly, barely acknowledging her as she struggled to keep up. One man even snapped at her for being slow. Sundar clenched his jaw. She bowed her head, whispered an apology, and continued serving. No one seemed to see her. No one seemed to care. Memories crashed into him. The woman who once carried him on her back when he was sick, who gave up her own meals so he could eat, who stayed awake through the night when fever gripped him now. Reduced to this, ignored, overworked, and unseen. A wave of guilt washed over him. How could he, of all people, not have thought of her sooner? With all his success, with all his wealth, had he forgotten the hands that once shaped his childhood? He stepped closer, his voice finally breaking through. Kamala? She looked up slowly, her eyes squinting as if to place the voice. When their gazes met, Sundar saw the confusion in her face, then surprise, and finally tears welling in her tired eyes. Her lips trembled, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. Sundar? She whispered, as if afraid it was just a dream. He rushed forward, his hands trembling now as he held hers. It's me. It's really me. The shop grew quiet. A few customers paused, curious at the sudden scene, but Sundar didn't notice. All he saw was the woman who had given him love when the world was too busy to notice a small boy. Kamala's tears rolled down her cheeks as she cupped his face gently. "I thought I would never see you again," she said, her voice breaking. Sundar hugged her. A deep embrace that felt like a bridge between two lifetimes. He didn't care about the stares or the whispers around them. In that moment, nothing mattered but her. But just as the warmth of reunion settled in, Sundar noticed something strange. A small notebook lay open near the counter, filled with scribbles of debts and payments. Names, numbers, and red marks filled the pages. As his eyes scanned them, he realized the truth. Kamala was not just working because she wanted to stay busy. She was trapped in debts, forced to keep working despite her fragile age. And worse, some of the names looked familiar, names of local moneylenders known for exploitation. Sundar's chest tightened again. This was not just about reunion. This was about survival. She was 85, still fighting battles she should have never faced alone. He looked into her weary eyes and knew at once he could not walk away. And just as he was about to speak, just as he was about to promise her that everything would change, a man entered the shop. Tall, sharp eyes, a cold smirk. He walked straight to the counter, ignoring Sundar. "Old woman," he said harshly, "where is my money?" "You are late again." The room went silent. Kama, single quotes, his hands shook harder. She lowered her head, whispering something Sundar couldn't hear. The man slammed his fist on the counter. "No. Excuses. Okay today, or you know what happens." Sundar turned to face him, his eyes burning with a calm fire. He had walked into this shop to reconnect with his past, but now he realized fate had given him something bigger, a test of his own. Humanity. The room pulsed with tension. Sundar's lips parted, his voice steady but sharp. "She will not pay you another rupee." The man froze, his smirk fading, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward Sundar. The battle lines had been drawn. Asterisk, the debt collector, man who had stormed into the shop, stood taller than most, his shoulders broad, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal arms marked with tattoos. His presence carried the weight of fear, and even the other customers who had lingered quickly found excuses to leave. The tiny bell on the shop door jingled as it closed behind them, leaving only Sundar, Kamala, and the stranger in the dimly lit store. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of Kamala's shallow breathing. Sundar's words hung in the air like a challenge. "She will not pay you another rupee." The man's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. He tilted his head slightly, as though assessing Sundar. He had not recognized him yet, which was exactly how Sundar wanted it. Without the label of the CEO attached to his name, he was just another man standing in defense of someone forgotten. But Sundar knew that even without his title, he could not back down. This was not about pride. It was about dignity, hers, and maybe even his own. The man stepped closer, his boots thudding against the worn wooden floor. "Who are you to speak for her?" He sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between me and the old woman. She owes money. And when people owe me, they pay. Always." Kamala's frail hands trembled as she tried to intervene. "Please, sir, he does not know. I will pay soon. Just a few more days." Voice cracked, and Sundar felt his heart clench. The woman who had once stood tall in his childhood memory now bent in fear before a man who thrived on it. But Sundar held her hand firmly, shaking his head gently. "No, Kamala. This ends today." His voice was steady, though inside his chest his heart pounded with anger. The man's smirk returned, this time darker. "You think you can stop me?" He leaned forward, his breath heavy with arrogance. "Do you know how many people have tried? They all regretted it." His eyes flicked up and down, judging Sundar's simple clothes, dismissing him as just another fool playing hero. Sundar's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. Years in boardrooms, years of negotiation and strategy had taught him that true power did not need to shout. But this was not a boardroom. This was a cramped little shop, and the woman beside him was shaking with fear. "Know exactly who you are," Sundar said quietly, His eyes locked onto the man's. A bully who feeds on the weak. But you will not touch her again. The man's laughter exploded through the shop, harsh and mocking. Big words. I've heard them before. He jabbed a finger toward Kamala. She's mine until every rupee is paid. Something inside Sundar snapped, not in rage, but in resolve. He stepped between Kamala and the man, his voice firmer now. No, she is not. She gave her life serving others with love and sacrifice. She owes you nothing. If there is debt, then I will take it on. You. Deal with me now. Kamala gasped, her grip tightening on his sleeve. No, Sundar, please do not get involved. He is dangerous. I cannot let you. But Sundar turned, his gaze softening as he looked at her. You have done enough for me, Kamala. You carried me when I could not walk. You fed me when you had nothing left for yourself. Now it is my turn. Her tears spilled. Over. Silent streams down her wrinkled face. She whispered his name like a prayer, caught between fear and relief. The man, however, was no longer amused. His smirk had twisted into something uglier. You think money can solve this? He hissed. You don't even know how deep her debts go. She owes interest. She owes for late payments. She owes for breathing my air. You could empty your pockets now, and it would not be enough. Sundar studied him carefully. This was not just about money, it was about control. This man thrived on keeping the vulnerable trapped, always one payment behind, always too afraid to break free. Sundar knew this pattern. He had read about it, seen it in documentaries, even heard about such men in his own childhood neighborhoods. But seeing it now, so close, tied to someone he loved, it was unbearable. Then tell me how much, Sundar said evenly. Every last rupee, I will pay it. She will not work another day for you. The man leaned back slightly, a cruel glint in his eyes. You? Pay? Do you even know what you're saying? This isn't some charity. This is my business. If I let her go, others will think they can do the same. I can't have that. I have to make an example. The words chilled the room. Sundar realized this wasn't just about freeing Kamala. This was about standing against a system that thrived on fear. The man didn't want money, he wanted submission. And Sundar could not allow Kamala's life to end in chains of humiliation. For a moment, the two men stood locked in silence. Sundar's calm determination against the man's raw menace. The tension was so thick, even the ticking of the old clock on the wall seemed louder. Then the man leaned closer, his whisper venomous. Walk away now, before you regret it. But Sundar did not move. His face remained steady, though his thoughts raced. He knew he could not fight this battle with fists. He would lose. But there were other ways the man could not see yet. No, Sundar replied softly but firmly. I will not walk away. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. He slammed his hand down on counter, the jars rattling violently. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Kamala flinched, clutching Sundar's arm desperately. Sundar steadied her with a gentle touch, but his eyes never left the man. The silence that followed was suffocating. The man's words lingered, a promise of something darker yet to come. Sundar knew this fight had only just begun, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a storm cloud. Then, without another word, the man turned sharply and walked out of the shop. The bell above the door jingled again, but this time the sound was sharp, almost mocking. Kamala collapsed into the chair behind the counter, her breaths uneven. Sundar, what have you done? She whispered. He crouched beside her, his eyes filled with both guilt and determination. What I should have done long ago, he said. I will not let him hurt you anymore. But even as he spoke, Sundar knew the truth. The man's threat was real. This was no empty intimidation. He would be back, and when he returned, he would not come alone. As Sundar helped Kamala sip a glass of water with trembling hands. The sound of a motorcycle engine roared in the distance, growing louder. Sundar's heart sank as the noise multiplied into several engines. They were not waiting. They were coming back already. The storm arrived, sound of motorcycles grew louder, echoing down the narrow street like the approach of an oncoming storm. Sundar's grip on the chair tightened as his mind raced. Kamala sat trembling, her frail hands clasped together as if in silent prayer, her eyes darting to the door. She knew what was coming. She had lived in fear of these men for years, each visit leaving her weaker, more broken, yet too trapped to escape. Now they were back, and this time she feared the cost would be far greater. Got the first motorcycle screeched to a halt outside the shop, then another, then another. The engines rattled, sending vibrations through the dusty floorboards. Shadows stretched across the glass door as three men dismounted, their laughter sharp, their boots heavy against the pavement. The man from earlier had returned, but he wasn't alone. He had brought his men. Sundar. Kamala whispered, clutching his arm, her voice trembling. You should leave, please. They don't know who you are. You must not risk yourself for me. Her words were filled with desperation, but Sundar shook his head, his voice steady. No, Kamala. I will not leave you again. Not this time. Inside, his heart pounded with conflict. He had faced some of the most powerful business leaders in the world, negotiated with governments, dealt with crises that had affected millions of people. Yet nothing felt as personal, as urgent as this moment. This was not about boardrooms or headlines. This was about the woman who had once sacrificed her own health to feed him when his parents were away. This was about love, loyalty, and respect that could not be measured in wealth. The door swung open violently, the bell crashing against the frame. Three men entered, their presence suffocating. The leader stepped forward, his smirk wide as his eyes scanned the room. I warned you, he said coldly, his voice dripping with malice. And you didn't listen. His men spread out, one circling near the shelves, another leaning against the counter, knocking over jars as if to show how little they cared. The customers outside quickly scattered, shutting windows, pulling curtains, pretending not to see. Sundar noticed this silence, the kind of silence born from years of fear. These men ruled this neighborhood like predators, and the people had learned to hide rather than resist. The leader's eyes landed on Sundar. Still here? Brave or stupid? Which is it? Sundar rose slowly, his height not intimidating, but his calm presence filling the room with a different kind of weight. I told you, he said quietly, she will not pay you another rupee. Whatever you think she owes, bring it to me. The man chuckled darkly, exchanging looks with his companions. You think this is about money? He snapped his fingers, and one of his men grabbed a jar from the shelf and smashed it against the floor. Shards scattered, spices spilling like blood across the wood. Kamala flinched, her breath catching. This is about respect, the leader continued. She owes because she is weak, and I cannot let weakness escape. If she walks free, others will try. Then what becomes of my power? He stepped closer, his face inches from Sundar's. Do you see now? It isn't about her. It's about me. The words were chilling, but they also revealed a truth Sundar had already guessed. This man was not just a debt collector. He was a tyrant in a small kingdom of fear. And Sundar knew that if he walked away now, Kamala would not only lose, but the entire community would remain chained to this man's cruelty. Still, Sundar's mind raced with doubt. What could he do? He was just one man, unarmed, standing in a crumbling shop against three dangerous men. His logical side screamed at him to call the police, to use his influence, to fight this battle with power and resources far beyond the moment. But another voice inside him, the voice of a son of a boy who had once been carried on Kamala's shoulders, told him he could not leave this room without standing tall. He spoke with quiet conviction, his voice steady despite the tremor. In his chest, your power is an illusion. It only exists because people are too afraid to stand up to you. But today, it ends. The men laughed, their mocking echo filling the shop. One of them stepped forward, shoving Sundar hard against the counter. And how will you end it? With words. With your empty hands? Kamala cried out, her frail body trembling as she tried to pull Sundar back. Please, stop this. Please don't hurt him, she begged. But the men ignored her, their focus fixed on Sundar, who straightened slowly, refusing to look away. The leader smirked again, leaning closer. You talk big, but talk is cheap. Pay her debt or leave or bleed. Your choice. Sundar's eyes flicked to the notebook on the counter, the book filled with red marks, with names and debts scribbled like chains binding the helpless. His jaw tightened. This was not just about Kamala anymore. It was bigger than her, bigger than him. It was about every name in that book, every family suffering silently under the weight of fear. He took a deep breath, then spoke words that silenced even the laughter. I will not give you a single coin, but I promise you this every name. In that book, every person you hold down, I will free them, and you will have nothing left. The room went still. The men stopped moving, even Kamala's breath caught in shock. Sundar had not just defied them, he had declared war. Asterisk the leaders. Eyes darkened, the amusement gone. You don't know what you've done, he hissed Ben, without warning. One of the men lunged, grabbing Sundar by the collar. Kamala screamed as the shelves shook from the sudden struggle. Sundar tried to stay calm, tried to hold his ground. But the force was overwhelming in that moment as chaos erupted. Sundar caught sight of something unexpected. A young boy, no more than 12, peeking through the half-open door of the shop across the street. His wide eyes locked on Sundar's, filled with fear. But also something else. Hope. The realization struck Sundar like lightning. He was not just fighting for Kamala. He was being watched. The community, hidden behind curtains, behind doors, behind silence, was watching to see if someone could finally stand against the fear that had ruled them for years. And Sundar knew he could not fail them. Not now. Not ever. But as the man's grip tightened on his collar, lifting him slightly, off the ground, Sundar felt his vision blur. He struggled, gasping for breath, as Kamala screamed his name again. Asterisk. And just before the darkness threatened to pull him under, Sundar heard the roar of yet another engine outside. Different, heavier, powerful. A black car screeched to a halt, its doors flung open, and several figures stepped out. The leaders. Men froze, their grip loosening just slightly. As they turned toward the sound, Sundar fell to the floor, coughing, his eyes straining to see through the haze. Who were these new arrivals? Friend or foe? The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension unbearable. And then a voice rang out from the doorway, calm, steady, but filled with authority. Let him go. Asterisk, the voice in the doorway shop was silent, except for Kamala's frightened sobs and Sundar's ragged breaths. The man who had been choking him loosened his grip, startled by the sudden interruption. All eyes turned toward the door. Framed in the sunlight stood 3 figures in dark suits, their posture straight, their presence commanding. Behind them, the sleek black car's engine still hummed, a symbol of power that didn't need to shout. The leader of the thugs narrowed his eyes, his smirk faltering for the first time. He recognized authority when he saw it, but his arrogance kept him rooted in place. And who are you supposed to be? He sneered, though his voice carried a slight edge of unease. The man in the doorway stepped forward. Tall with sharp eyes and a calm expression, he didn't look like someone who relied on intimidation. Instead, there was a steadiness about him, the kind that came from years of discipline. His voice, when he spoke again, was even but unshakable. I said let him go. Kamala's eyes widened with shock. Sundar, still coughing on the floor, looked up at the man, his vision slowly clearing. Recognition flickered. This wasn't a stranger. It was Rayesh, Sundar's old driver from years ago in Chennai, now head of security for him in the U.S. Rayesh had been with Sundar in the early days of his success, but over time, Sundar had insisted on traveling lighter, less visible. Yet, Rayesh had always stayed close, loyal, protective, watching from the shadows. Rayesh's eyes locked on Sundar's, and in that silent exchange, everything was clear. He had followed Sundar discreetly that morning, sensing his unease. Knowing Sundar's instincts rarely led him into ordinary moments. And now, Rayesh had arrived just in time. The man holding Sundar finally dropped him, stepping back as Rayesh and his team entered the shop. You think you can walk in here and give orders? The leader barked, his voice louder now, as though volume could mask the fear creeping in. This is my street, my rules. No one tells me what to do. Rayesh didn't flinch. His calm stare never wavered. Your rules end here? You've taken enough from these people. Today it stops. The tension in the shop thickened like smoke. The thug leader's men glanced nervously at each other. They had ruled this street through fear for years, but this was different. These newcomers weren't trembling villagers or tired shopkeepers. They were men who carried themselves with quiet confidence, the kind that came from training, from knowing exactly how to handle threats. Kamala, still clutching the counter for support, whispered to Sundar, "You shouldn't have come here. This is too dangerous. You should leave while you can." Sundar shook his head, standing slowly despite the pain in his chest. His voice was hoarse, but his eyes were clear with determination. No, Kamala, I'm not leaving. Not without you. Not without ending this. Her tears fell harder, torn between fear for his safety and the overwhelming love she felt seeing him risk everything for her. The leader, sensing his grip slipping, clenched his fists and barked orders at his men. Enough of this. Show them what happens when people forget who runs this place. One of his men grabbed a wooden stick from behind the counter. Another pulled a chain from his belt, the metal links clinking like a warning. The air pulsed with the threat of violence. Rayesh's men shifted, ready to intercept, but Sundar raised his hand. No, he said firmly. Not like this. Everyone froze, even Rayesh. Sundar's voice carried a different kind of power now, not of physical strength, but of conviction. He stepped forward, placing himself between Kamala and the thugs once more. His shirt was wrinkled, his face pale from the earlier struggle, but his posture was steady, unyielding. Listen to me, Sundar said, his tone calm but cutting through the air. You think you have power because people fear you? But power built on fear is fragile. It can collapse the moment people stop being afraid, the leader snarled. And who do you think will stop fearing me? This old woman? These ghosts hiding? In their houses? You? Sundar's eyes didn't waver. Yes, me and them. Because fear only works until someone decides to stand. And today I am standing. Outside, unnoticed, until now, faces began to appear in windows. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. The roar of the motorcycles had drawn the neighbors, but they had stayed hidden, as always. Yet now, seeing Sundar speak, seeing someone challenge the man who had ruled their lives, their silence began to waver. Eyes filled with cautious curiosity. With the first sparks of courage, the leader noticed it too. His anger flared, but beneath it, fear flickered. He turned back to Sundar, his voice rising. You don't know what you're getting into. I have friends. I have protection. People in power depend on me. I'm untouchable. Sundar's lips pressed into a thin line. He had heard those words before, from men in expensive suits and polished offices, men who thought their wealth or connections made them invincible. But he had learned something long ago. No one is truly untouchable when truth stands against them. You see, Sundar said quietly, his gaze piercing. The leader, sensing his grip slipping further, finally snapped. Enough talking. Finish him. The thug with the stick lunged forward, swinging toward Sundar. Rayesh's men moved instantly, intercepting with swift precision, the stick clattering to the floor. The man with the chain tried to strike, but another guard blocked him, twisting the chain from his hands with practiced skill. The room erupted into chaos, the sound of struggle filling the air. Jars toppled, shelves shook. The bell above the door rang wildly as the fight spilled near the entrance. Cried out, clutching her chest as Sundar pulled her back to safety behind the counter. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the weight of realization this was bigger than a fight. This was a war for dignity, for justice, for freedom. The leader, realizing his men were losing, reached into his pocket. Sundar's eyes caught the glint of metal, something small but dangerous. It wasn't just fists anymore. Time seemed to slow. Rayesh shouted something. The guards moved, but the leader's hand was already rising. The object gleaming in the dim light. Kamala gasped, her voice breaking in terror. Sundar. And as the leader's hand came up fully, the weapon revealed at last. Sundar's world seemed to collapse into a single breathless second. Asterisk, the weapon in his hand, air in the small shop froze as the leader's hand rose. The object, glinting under the weak bulb that flickered above. Time stretched thin, every second heavier than the last. Sundar's breath caught, his arm instinctively wrapping around Kamala to shield her fragile frame. Rayesh's men shifted like shadows, their eyes locked on the danger. And then the weapon was fully revealed, an old but deadly pistol. Its metal surface scratched, yet no less threatening. Kamala's trembling gasp filled the silence. Her frail hands gripping Sundar's arm so tightly he could feel her bones. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. For her, this was not just a gun. It was the embodiment of years of helplessness, of debts and threats, of nights spent praying for safety. And now it was aimed at the one person who had dared to stand for her. The leader's face twisted into something between rage and triumph. You thought you could challenge me? This is how I deal with fools who forget their place. His finger brushed the trigger lightly, as though savoring the fear in the room. Arish took a slow step forward, his hands slightly raised, his voice calm but sharp. Think carefully. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. But the leader only laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and broken. Back? There's no back for me. This is my world. Fear keeps it alive, and if I let one man tear that down, I lose everything. No, I make an example, and everyone remembers who rules. Sundar felt his heart pound like a drum, yet his face remained steady. His mind raced not about his own safety, but about the sight of Kamala's tear-streaked face pressed against his shoulder. He thought of the boy across the street who had watched earlier, of the neighbors hiding behind curtains. He thought of every name in that debt notebook, every person living in quiet chains. And in that moment, he knew if he showed fear now, if he surrendered, this fight would mean nothing. He slowly stepped away from the counter, placing himself fully in the line of the weapon. Rayesh hissed under his breath for him to stay back. But Sundar's eyes never left the leader's. If you pull that trigger, Sundar said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of truth, you will not prove strength. You will prove fear, because only cowards kill the helpless. The leader's jaw tightened. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes, though it was quickly masked by anger. Big words, he spat, his hand shaking slightly on the pistol. But words don't stop bullets. Sundar took another step forward, slow, deliberate, his gaze steady. The shop seemed to shrink, every creak of the wood and every breath amplified. You think you are untouchable because people are silent, Sundar continued, his voice low. But uncheckable. But look outside. They are watching. They are seeing you for what you are. And no matter what happens to me here, they will never fear you the same way again. The leader's eyes flicked instinctively to the windows. And there they were, faces pressed against glass, doors slightly open, dozens of eyes staring, men, women, children, all watching, no longer fully hidden, no longer entirely silent. The realization struck him like a blow. His smirk faltered, and in its place came something uglier, desperation. He snarled, lifting the pistol higher, the barrel aimed straight at Sundar's chest. Then I'll end this right now. Time splintered. Rayesh's men tensed, ready to move, but the leader's finger was already tightening. Kamala screamed Sundar's name, clutching at him as though she could shield him with her frail body. Sundar stood tall, his chest rising with a calm breath. His voice, just before the sound of the shot filled the room, was steady. You cannot end what has already begun. The explosion of the gun was deafening in a small space. The shelves rattled, glass shattered, and Kamala's scream pierced the air like a knife. Sundar staggered backward, his hand instinctively clutching his side. Chaos erupted. Rayesh lunged forward, disarming the leader with a swift strike that sent the pistol skidding across the floor. His men restrained the others in a flurry of movement, the shop shaking with the violence of the clash. But Kamala's world shrank to one image: Sundar, collapsing into her arms, his shirt darkening with blood. She cried out, her trembling hands pressing desperately against the wound, her tears falling onto his face. No, not you, Sundar. Please, not you. Her voice broke, shaking like a child's. Sundar's eyes fluttered, his breath shallow but steady enough to whisper, "Don't cry, Kamala. I am still here." The fight around them blurred, the sound of fists, shouts, and breaking shelves fading into the background. All that remained in that moment was the bond between them, the boy she had once protected now lying wounded in her arms, yet still protecting her even as his strength faltered. Got outside. The neighbors had poured into the street, their silence shattered by the gunshot. Voices rose, angry, defiant. The people who had once hidden now stepped into the open, no longer willing to cower. Inside, Rayesh pinned the leader against the wall, his voice sharp with fury. "You've crossed the line. You're finished." But the leader, despite his capture, grinned through bloodied lips. "Finished? No. This is only the beginning. You think one wound will stop him? No, this will break him." His laughter was bitter, haunting, echoing through the shop even as his men were dragged down. Kama clutched Sundar tighter, her tears streaming endlessly. "You should not have come back for me," she sobbed, her voice heavy with guilt. Sundar, his face pale, forced his lips into the faintest smile. "How could I not?" he whispered, his words weak but filled with love, and then his eyes slipped shut, his body going limp against her. The world seemed to stop. Kamala's wail tore through the silence, a sound so raw it shook even the neighbors. Outside, Rayesh shouted Sundar's name, his face filled with fear as he dropped the leader to rush toward his friend. But Sundar did not respond. Asterisk. The awakening shop was chaos. Broken jars scattered across the floor, the smell of spilled spices mingling with the sharp sting of gunpowder. Rayesh knelt beside Sundar, his face pale with fear, pressing his hand firmly over the wound. "Stay with us, Sundar," he muttered, urgently, his voice trembling in a way none of his men had ever heard before. Kamala sobbed uncontrollably, rocking back and forth as if she could will life back into the man who had once been the little boy she carried on her back. Outside, the crowd had grown larger, their whispers turning into shouts, their fear transforming into anger. The sound of many voices filled the street, no longer the silence of resignation, but the rumble of defiance. For the first time in years, the community was no longer hiding. They were gathering. They were rising. Sundar's body was limp, his face drained of color. Kamala leaned close, whispering through her tears, "Please, my boy, you cannot leave me now." "Not like this." Her trembling fingers brushed his cheek, her tears falling onto his skin, and then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, Sundar's lips moved. His eyes fluttered, and with great effort, he whispered, "I am not leaving." Relief crashed over Kamala like a wave. Rayesh exhaled sharply, nodding. He's alive. He's fighting. With practiced precision, Rayesh's men began working, binding the wound with strips torn from their own shirts, applying pressure, keeping him conscious. The leader, pinned to the floor by Rayesh's men, sneered despite his defeat. "He won't last long. Even if he lives, he can't fight us all. We own this place. We own everyone here." His words dripped with poison, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the windows, where more and more faces were appearing. Sundar, weak but conscious, turned his head slightly, his eyes locking on the leader. Even through the haze of pain, his voice was clear enough to cut through the room. "You own nothing." The words struck like a hammer. The neighbors outside erupted, in louder shouts, chanting, demanding, no longer content to stay silent. The walls of fear that had trapped them for decades were breaking, and it was because one man had stood when no one else dared. Kamala still holding him close, looked around through her tears. She saw neighbors stepping into the street, men who had once bowed their heads, women who had once stayed silent, even children standing tall beside their parents. It was as though Sundar's courage had lit a fire in their hearts, a fire that no amount of threats or debts could extinguish. Rayesh barked orders, and his men dragged the leader and his companions outside, where the crowd surrounded them. The leader's bravado faltered at last, his smirk replaced by fear as dozens of voices rose against him. No longer was he the master of this street. No longer did his threats carry weight. Inside, Sundar struggled to sit up, despite Rayesh's protests. His hand, weak but determined, reached for Kamala's. "Look," he whispered, nodding toward the crowd. "They're not afraid anymore, because of you, because you endured." Kamala shook her head, tears spilling freely. "No, my boy, because of you. You gave them the courage I never could." Sundar's gaze softened, his voice faint but resolute. "No, Kamala, you gave it to me first. When I was a child, you taught me kindness, sacrifice, resilience, everything I am today. I learned from you. I could not let the world forget. You." Her sobs deepened, not of sorrow now, but of overwhelming love. She pressed her forehead gently against his, whispering through her tears, "You were always my son, Sundar. Not by blood, but by heart." The street outside roared with unity. The neighbors had taken hold of the debt notebook, tearing its pages, setting fire to the records that had enslaved them. Flames rose into the air, the ashes of their chains scattering like black snow. The leader screamed in protest, but his voice was drowned out by the chants of freedom, the cries of a people no longer willing to bow. Rayesh stood guard over Sundar and Kamala, his eyes scanning the street, but even he felt the shift. The power was gone from the men who had terrorized this community. The power now belonged to the people. Hours later, after the police arrived to take the thugs away, after the crowd slowly dispersed, and after the shop had grown quiet again, Sundar sat weak but upright in a chair, his wound bandaged. Kamala sat beside him, refusing to leave his side. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both pride and guilt. "You nearly gave your life for me. Why, Sundar? Why risk everything when you already have the world?" He turned his head, his gaze gentle, his voice calm. "What good is the world if we forget the people who made us who we are? Without you, I would not be here. You cared for me when no one else could. You gave me strength when I had none. Now it is my turn to give it back." Kamala's tears returned, but this time they were tears of joy. She held his hand tightly, her voice breaking as she said, "You are the son every mother dreams of." Days later, Sundar made sure Kamala's life changed forever. He paid off every debt in the neighborhood, but more than that, he set up a community trust, ensuring no one would ever again fall prey to such cruelty. He rebuilt the shop into a community center, a place of learning, of safety, of hope. And at his heart was Kamala, not working anymore, but honored her picture hanging on the wall, the woman who had once been overlooked, now celebrated as the soul of the community. But the most shocking moment came when Sundar stood before the gathered crowd and announced something no one expected. "This center," he said, his voice strong despite his healing wound, "will bear her name, the Kamala home. Because it was her love, her sacrifice that taught me the meaning of humanity." The people erupted in applause, their voices echoing down the street. Kamala wept openly, her wrinkled hands covering her face, overwhelmed by a love she had never imagined. As Sundar watched her, his chest still aching, but his heart fuller than ever, he knew this was his true success. Not the titles, not the wealth, not the empire he had built, but this moment, standing beside the woman who had shaped his beginnings, giving her the honor she always deserved.